Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Al. Earlier this week we got a brand new build for the War Within Alpha, and as part of the Blue Post update, they mentioned that Rogue's third hero spec of the Deathstalker should be ready and available for playtesting. However, at the time of the update it was not functional, though the very next evening during the later hours of the night they did hotfix it so we could actually test it out against train dummies, dells, and in dungeons. This is the Rogue's third hero spec of the Deathstalker, shared between Assassination and Subtlety, a more single-minded focused hero spec that's going to be a little bit different than the rest. Fusing together deadly plague damage as well as powerful finishing strikes, these rogues mark their enemies for death and then relentlessly hunt them down until the job is done. So today I want to do a quick overview of the Deathstalker hero spec, go over every one of its talents, and give you guys some of my initial thoughts behind the gameplay of this rogue playstyle. Right before that though, if you guys want to see more class changes and updates for the War Within Alpha, be sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right in. So earlier tonight, we actually have had a hotfix over to the Alpha, where Deathstalkers are now testable as the final hero spec to the class of Rogue in the War Within. And Deathstalkers are going to have a little bit more of a thematic playstyle to them. Deathstalkers initially were a spy network of undead rogues in service of the Banshee Queen, acting like an elite death guard. What makes undead the perfect assassin is the fact that they can just lie underwater and wait until their target is upon them because they don't need air, or they can even pretend to be a corpse in the battlefield until the perfect moment to strike. And Deathstalkers are going to have a lot of those thematic elements baked into their talent tree, with the primary ability being the Deathstalker's Mark. Ambushing from stealth applies 3 stacks of Deathstalker's Mark to your target. When you spend 5 or more common points into a finisher against the target, you consume an application of Deathstalker's Mark, dealing plague damage and increasing the damage of a next ambush, mutilate, backstab, or shadow strike. And you may only have 1 target marked at a time when playing as a Deathstalker. So when you play your Assassination Rogue, every time you ambush from stealth, you're going to be applying the debuff of Deathstalker's Mark to the target. And as it states, every time you spend common points into a finisher while the enemy is marked with the Deathstalker's Mark, it's going to consume a charge of Deathstalker's Mark, and it's going to allow you to deal additional poison, or rather plague damage. It's the Deathstalker's Mark. It does a little bit of damage right now. It's not a crazy amount, but with it being plague damage, it actually ends up being the perfect element that was shared between Subtlety and Assassination, since plague is a mixture of nature and shadow damage. Nature damage that's buffed up by a variety of different talents from the Assassination spec, but also shadow with a bunch of talents that amplify that shadow focused damage. And as it says, if you mark a different target with ambush, only 1 target may have that mark on them. So every time you ambush a new target, they actually get remarked. This means that naturally this hero spec is going to be very single target focused, but it doesn't mean that it's a single target only hero spec. But with that being said, let's get into some of the other talents. In the first row, we have Singular Focus, which again, this is going to be a very singular focus hero spec thematically, but also in gameplay. Damage dealt to targets other than your marked target deals 3% plague damage to your marked targets. This means if you are, let's say, ambushing the primary target of your choice, and anytime you deal damage to anything that isn't your primary target, like auto attacks, you'll see the plague damage is actually going to be building up off of that target. So any damage you do to any nearby foes, it's actually going to make that target also take additional damage. This is kind of like how you're going to be able to funnel. You'll be able to do damage to everything else while amplifying the damage you do to that primary focus target. Then we have Hunt Them Down as a talent where auto attacks against marked targets deal additional plague damage. So all of your attacks against the primary foe that is marked with an ability is going to have them take consistent plague damage. And how fast rogues can auto attack with their daggers, this only means you're going to be generating a ton of consistent passive damage. On the left hand side, we have Clear the Witnesses, where your next fan of knives after applying a Deathstalker's Mark will deal additional shadow damage and will generate 1 additional combo point. Although in the early testing, it doesn't seem like this talent right now generates any additional shadow damage. But if we were to take the idea that this talent, let's say, does function, it does seem like they'll actually have some uncapped potential, since Phantom Knives is going to affect every target, even though it has a bit of a soft cap, but the shadow damage should still affect every single target that it strikes, which could be somewhat strong in certain situations. In the next row, we have a new choice node with Lingering Darkness or Symbolic Victory. This one is going to be a little bit different for Subtlety or Assassination. For Assass, Symbolic Victory is going to allow Shiv to additionally increase the damage of your next Envenom by 10 additional %, or with Linger in Darkness, after you use Death Mark and after the ability expires, you gain 3 seconds of 10% additional increased nature damage. Though for Subtlety, this talent is a little different, with Symbolic Victory allowing Symbols of Death additionally to increase the damage of your next Eviscerate or Black Powder by 10%, while with Lingering Darkness, after Shadow Blade expires, you gain 3 seconds of 10% increased shadow damage. Over in the middle, we have a new convenience of Corrupt the Blood, where Rupture deals additional plague damage each time it deals damage, stacking up to 10 times, and Rupture duration is being increased by 3 additional seconds. This means as a Subtlety or Assassination rogue, you maybe want to be a little bit more careful regarding your Ruptures and try to let them max out on their full value, because the longer the ability takes down, the more damage Corrupt the Blood is going to do. And the next talent is going to be Flensing Knives, where Slash Dice causes you Mutilate to deal additional plague damage, with it being backstab for the Spec of Subtlety, which gives us yet another source of plague damage that we apply to the enemy target. Over in the next row, we have even more choices such as Shadewalker, where each time you consume a stack of Deathstalker's Mark, you reduce the cooldown of Shadow Step by 3 seconds. Or you can go with Shroud of Night, where Shroud of Concealment duration is being increased by 5 seconds. Over in the middle row, we have Momentum of Despair, or Follow the Blood. With Follow the Blood, Phantom Knives, Shuriken Storm, Crimson Tempest, and Black Powder all deal 20% additional damage, while 3 or more enemies are afflicted by Rupture. Though with Momentum of Despair, whenever you critical strike with a Fan of Knives or Shuriken Storm, you increase the critical strike chance of Fan of Knives, Shuriken Storm, and Black Powder by 15% for 12 seconds. And after that, we got yet another choice node, which is going to be more defensive, either Ethereal Cloak, where Cloak of Shadow's duration is being increased by 2 additional seconds, or a more interesting choice of Bait and Switch, where Evasion now reduces magical damage taken by 20%, and Cloak of Shadows reduces physical damage taken by 20%. Now, for the vital trait, you have the Darkest Night. When you consume the final Deathstalker's Mark from a target, you gain 60 energy instantly, and your next Venom or Eviscerate cast with maximum common points is guaranteed to critically strike, deal 30% additional damage, and applies 3 stacks of Deathstalker's Mark to the enemy target. This means that either Subtlety or Assassination, you want to be able to consume all of the stacks of Deathstalker's Mark whenever you can. In order to gain the energy buff, the Eviscerate or Envenom 100% critical strike chance, 30% additional damage, but also a way for you to reapply Deathstalker's Mark back to the target to then churn out as many finishers as possible. As for the actual gameplay of the Deathstalker, I got to spend a little bit of time with it, and I want to spend a bit more doing dungeons, doing a lot more delve content, really messing around with Deathstalker, but I found some issues with it that I first want to cover very quickly. Off the bat, as Assassination, it's a little bit difficult for you to maintain Deathstalker's Mark on a target, but also get the full value out of Darkest Night. For example, if let's say you're fighting an enemy and they die a little prematurely, then you actually lose out on Deathstalker's Mark. When this debuff expires, it doesn't actually activate Darkest Night immediately. It's only whenever you consume the final mark of final charge of Deathstalker that you get Darkest Night buff to reapply to your next target. But if a target dies a little early, Deathstalker Mark cannot be reapplied unless you enter stealth and then press ambush. As of right now, that's the only way that Assassination could really apply it without Darkest Night. Whereas Subtlety, you actually can apply it while Dance is active with Shadow Strikes, so Subtlety is going to have an easier time with Deathstalker's Mark. At least you could reapply it easily and get some benefits of it. Though for Subtlety, I noticed you get to apply way too many stacks since you get access to Shadow Strike pretty regularly, so you end up applying too many stacks and it's really difficult to benefit from Darkest Night. I think they may want to limit the amount of stacks maximum you can apply from Deathstalkers, and I feel like a 3 stacks max is good enough. And maybe they should make it a little bit harder for Subtlety to reapply Deathstalker's mark if one is already active, instead of just adding charges to one that is existent. But besides that, besides it not really functioning super well for Assassination in some of those very specific content, which is pretty regular in even in a delve or even in a dungeon right now, when it does work, when you do get the full value out of Deathstalker's mark, I feel that the gameplay is quite interesting. It is going to make you really focus on that single target value, really trying to maximize the value of the death mark. But as Assassination, for the most part, at least when it comes to AoE gameplay, you'll dot up a bunch of enemies with bleeds, and then you'll primarily focus on the primary target, and this gives you more of a reason to spam envenoms into that target, especially just to activate Darkest Night as a buff. And I think at the end of the day, it kind of works out somewhat okay in my opinion. And there's some cool elements to like Follow Blood, which does give you some AoE value, but of course it's going to be more of this funnel focus, which ends up benefiting, I think, Subtlety a little bit more, since you will want to use Eviscerate once in a while on primary target. But of course, like I said before, so there are going to be some situations where there's going to be a funnel encounter, where you will want to funnel a lot of that AoE comp points and AoE damage to really primarily slam down your focus target as often as possible. I feel like Deathstalker's mark actually would have worked a lot better as an Outlaw rogue spec, since you can just turn on Blade Flurry to cleave everything around you, and you just focus on that primary target the entire time. Though for Outlaw, I feel like thematically Deathstalker wouldn't have worked out, because it's supposed to be an assassin, strikes from the shadows, Subtlety and Assassination are the better specs for it. Though this would have actually synergized with Outlaw much more, since you do a lot more single target damage even while you AoE. But overall, I don't hate the idea and the thematics and the playstyle that is offered with the Deathstalker mark. Though I will say this, there's already some exploits that can be done with Deathstalker easily, and I think it's going to be quite hilarious to see if they end up fixing them by the time War Within goes into beta, or maybe by the time it goes into release. But I think Deathstalker is looking pretty exploity and potentially could be a ton of fun to mess around with. But with that being said, I like the defensive aspects, I like the AoE aspects, I even like the utilitarian and mobility aspects, and some of the smaller gameplay additions like longer dots with your Rupture, more AoE funnel damage, auto attack value, plague damage in particular. I think it could be really good, especially if it's tuned well and tuned correctly. But with that being said, that's going to be the Deathstalker hero spec. And I gave you guys all my opinions, what I think about it, but at the end of the day, who cares about my opinions? I really want to hear what you guys think in the comments down below. What do you think about the new Deathstalker hero spec? What are your first impressions of it? Do you like it and the whole single-minded focus that it offers, really encouraging the player to focus on a singular foe, even enough to create some kind of a funnel type of playstyle? Or do you think it's maybe a little bit too single target focus and you would like it to be a little bit better when it comes to AoE output? And would you rather play Deathstalker as a Subtlety or Assassination, and which spec do you think it fits best to right now? Let me know all of those thoughts in the comments down below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video, or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.